Hello. Is a car gonna drive by the second I start this? Okay, so, hi. I think it's been 3 weeks since episode 0 by the time that I eventually get this edited. And I was too ambitious with what I wanted to get done. So, what I actually have done is not nearly as much, but I think I have a better frame of reference to what I can get done by the end of the summer. And also realizing that I need to treat this as I need to treat this like it's a vlog. Unless, it's a series that needs to be super polished. Whenever I put myself in the mindset of this needs to be a series that's, really well done and things need to get out at a certain time, I'm just going to not do it. Or it's going to turn into kind of like how my puppet series went, where it was okay, and I'm glad that I did them, but they took way too long, and I don't really want to do it again. So this is going to be different. I'm generalizing it into an art vlog series. It's not going to be just the one comic that I want to make, but kind of general things that I'm doing, and hopefully that will make me more likely to have this a consistent bi-weekly series. Rambling aside, this video is going to be illustration work, a little bit of concepting, and at the end I might show some script writing, because I quickly realized that when you're story planning something as a person who craves feedback and has a really difficult time making things without other people's input to bounce off of, you get kind of stir crazy in your brain. I was doing exactly that. So I need to stop doing that and actually start talking to my friends about the things that I'm making. Because people, most of the time, really do want to actually hear the projects that you're working on and hear the ideas that you have. So at the end of this video, or I guess towards the end, after I go through kind of the more illustrative process that I had at the beginning for this one piece that I did, I'm going to go a little bit more into the script of the thing that I'm planning. And that's what I've been doing this week, is mostly illustration and trying to keep myself working. Because this week has been rough. August is rough. We get through it. We keep going. And I think this illustration is pretty cool. And shows a little bit of Pitmenon as a world, so that'll be interesting. I don't know what else I'm going to be talking about in this video. I hope this intro isn't crazy long. I want to animate more. I want to animate more this week and this month generally. I want to try and get maybe, and I need to stop thinking about stuff as needing to be portfolio worthy, because I think that's part of why I'm having a struggle this week to actually get anything done. So I'm really just thinking about portfolio and that I'm not really doing enough. So cheers to trying to get out of that mindset. Can you hear the squirrel screaming in the background? Holy shit, he's pissed. Okay, anyway, I'm gonna start rambling. I'm gonna stop rambling at the camera now. There's a speed paint to watch. So to start with these concepts, I did a lot of scrolling through various architectural history sources, mainly websites. I had a few PDFs that I was perusing, but my main point of reference was this website called Historic New England. And here's where I started rambling about different architectural styles from the late 1800s. So yeah, here we go. There's lots of overlap between styles in the late 1800s and early 1900s, specifically in the Victorian-esque revival styles. So I was focusing on shingle, Queen Anne, and stick, and I did my best to try and pick the most standout features that overlap from each. There's also, from some of the sources, of PDFs that I was looking at, there was this one called American Victorian Architecture Survey of the 70s and 80s from Contemporary Photography. So this is a lot of old buildings that were really interesting, and when you search them up, you can kind of get a sense of which style that they belong to, even if the book didn't necessarily give you exactly what it was and was more so just a broad survey of Victorian-esque places. But yeah, so we got a mishmash here of a lot of different revival styles, but I'm very fond of them. I grew up in a city with a lot of restored and repurposed mills, and down the street from these mills are a ton of like high style Queen Anne houses that I'm just very fond of and I've always loved, so it made sense for me to kind of draw inspiration from those houses for the style of the main town that the story is set in, because Pitmennin as a story isn't set in a real town in New England. The surrounding world outside of Pitmennin as a fantasy town is very nebulous, and I'm keeping it that way on purpose, both from a creative standpoint of letting the audience infer or come up with what could be, out there, but also practically for me, it just makes more sense to keep myself grounded in one spot in the world. Otherwise, I'd be caught up in all the details of trying to develop the outside world and the whole world, and I think that's what hinders a lot of progress for myself, but also I think for a lot of people. You get stuck in the world building stage and you're trying to think of all of these things to come up with like the ins and outs of this whole society at large, when if that's what you really love to do, that's absolutely fine. Go crazy with world building, it's so much fun. But if you're wanting to focus on something that's character driven, your world is inevitably meant to serve your characters, so you don't need to overbloat it with details if you can help it. Kind of similarly, like with D&D, there's a ton of times where you may create this whole world and the party doesn't end up seeing a lot of it because they're going on their own journey and they don't end up using a lot of that. That doesn't mean it's bad as a backdrop, but if you don't need it and you find that it's just slowing you down and making you feel like you can't get started, I think that's when you can kind of say, okay, I don't need to know all these details and I can move on. Anyway, back to houses. For these houses, I tried to emulate that high style, getting across that this town was once probably very affluent, but because of the way it's aged, there's also an underlying decay that's caught onto a lot of the structures. So I've made them either very lopsided or increasingly asymmetrical and kind of like sinking into the foundation, covered in moss and that sort of thing. Plants pushing out of the shingles. I think I could push this further, so I'm gonna make a note for that in the future, but that's the idea. I also did a little sketch of what possibly the front of a bookstore could look like in the town. This one is partially owned by one of the main characters named Pluto. I also tried to keep in mind that a lot of the motifs that I wanted to incorporate, I did a little digging into plant and flower psychology, but again, I think I could push this even more with some different symbolism pulled from an environmental perspective. I love when stories have elements that are purely for that second read through, little Easter eggs that you can see. So yeah, I want to get into that more, but there's the startings of it. It's more in writing than in looks at the moment. So these sketches all jump-started a very specific idea that I then had for an illustration, so I immediately started thumbnailing this fountain. And this is getting into spoiler territory for the story, so I can't divulge that much about the meaning of this piece in particular, but I can talk about it a little bit. It features Pluto and this giant sculptural fountain made of wood and stone. It's in a particularly abandoned part of Pitmennin, and there's some stories and memories surrounding the creation of this fountain from the people living there. And they had seen a beast one night that rampaged the town and only stopped when cursed into the wooden form that she was frozen into. So that beast you see that's being drawn on the fountain was once real and now has been frozen in time, in a way. So understandably, the area carries this feeling of ill will and bad luck, but Pluto feels no such thing. And that's all I can really say about this illustration in terms of story. So let's talk about the process a little bit more. I did quite a bit of iteration for the thumbnail stage to get the proportions right, and I did get some help from a good friend who has an awesome eye for composition that they did some red lines for the thumbnails, and they were great, and I got into a spot where I was pretty happy with it, so I then messed around a little bit more with the proportions of things, and finally got it to a spot that I was pretty happy with. And if you're curious, I have a few different brushes that I use for sketching and line art that really just depend on how I'm feeling, because I can't stay with one brush for anything. I either use the Artemis Solid from the Artemis set on Clip Studio. I also use the SU Cream pencil, or a shale brush replica from, I'm pretty sure, also the CSP asset list. But it's very similar to the one in Procreate. I just edited it a little bit, that I found a while back. So sometimes I also line with more solid brushes, but I need texture in my life. So the G pens are the bane of my existence. I have a very specific set of ink brushes that I use. I don't remember where a lot of them came from because I renamed them, so I'm sorry about that. If I can eventually find out which brushes these came from, I will try and link them, but for now, they shall remain a mystery. But moving on from that, after I do my line art, my coloring process is pretty straightforward for the most part. I do a pass of blocking out colors, and this is where I figure out all of my hues and values before I go in and do anything else. I've never been a fan of the grayscale method, where you grayscale everything first and then add color. Major respect for people who can work that way and make it look absolutely amazing. I find that my colors always look washed out and weird if I try and go about it with that method. So if I am going to try and figure out values first, I do make a version that's like a value grayscale, but I never use that as a base to put color on top of, if that makes sense. So I usually start off by figuring out what my unifying color is in the background, similar to how a lot of artists do like an orange wash in the back, or like traditionally just putting down a wash of one color to kind of unify everything, and then I go from there. I never start with a white background because it just makes my life harder. After I do all my flats, I kind of wing it. If I'm making a cell shaded piece, it's different because there's, the flow of each layer having its specific dedicated purpose, shadow, light, highlight, rim light, all of the things, blending modes, all that jazz. But when I paint in this way, I kind of spit in the face of every non-destructive workflow for digital. All of my main rendering goes on one layer. And if I need to render a specific spot separate, I'll make a layer and then most of the time merge it down into everything else. With this piece, I hear you saying, but what are all these weird unnamed layers? And I'm glad you asked. Sometimes it's a light, sometimes it's a blending layer that's color correcting, sometimes it's a secondary layer on top of all of the rendering and on top of the line art. For this piece, I did a lot of plants using the lasso tool. I used the lasso tool for most of my painting rendering style. So sometimes I'll go over the line art that I've done in this way, kind of like with these plants, just to get a little bit of added dimension, some lineless vibes. But yeah, there's no rules, only guidelines and suggestions, so go crazy and take what we've learned to mess around. Maybe name your layers though. That's a genuinely bad habit of mine that only happens when I paint, because God forbid if I catch my Tomb Boom layers being disorganized, that's a sin. But here though, I guess it's whatever. I don't have a ton of layers, so it doesn't matter too much, but I would still recommend naming your layers, probably. But that's kind of it. This was the finished product. And this was all kind of culminating from the fact that I was having writer's block, and even though I really wanted to get done chapter 1 and 2 of scripting for the comic, I think it's okay that it didn't happen this week, because I ended up doing more research and I was able to get out a lot of problems that I had with the story via talking to friends and brainstorming, which was very beneficial, because I think now I have a better idea of how I could start the story, because one of the big problems I was having was the tone. I think a lot of the media that I enjoy, even though I guess it's the young adult, like, teen kid show vibe, where there's dark and serious undertones, but the general energy of the show is still light, usually comedic, which I don't know if I don't want to go a comedic route, but I know that I want to have a levity to the beginning to then have those darker parts hit more and have the characters be people that connect with and people can connect with. Yeah. Also to say, thank God that I did this illustration when I did, because I was going through crazy writer's block and I needed to. So, but that's all from me from this video. I don't even know if you can constitute this as a vlog series, because most of it is voiceover, but you know what? I think it counts, and that's all that matters. So, yeah. My next video will probably be out in 2 or 3 weeks. I'm thinking I'm gonna do like a bi-weekly, maybe 3-week schedule for these kinds of vlogs of me just showing what I've been working on. Maybe animation in the next one. I miss it. I miss it dearly, and I fear I just have too much I want to do and not enough time to do it. Alright, that's it. See you later.